Hello, friend. Have you recently been advertised a very cheap electric vehicle lease lately? Have you heard about it on the internet? Well, probably if you follow Kyle, Connor, out of spec creator on anything, because there have been crazy lease deals in Colorado for the Nissan Leaf, the new Nissan Leaf. And they're advertised as low as $9, but $20 as well. And of course, there comes fine print. While Kyle likes to say, hey, it's basically free, we know that it really isn't. But how many people go to the depths of analysis and build out the spreadsheets to figure out exactly how much it would cost to have a 2-year lease with this kind of lease? Wait, to have a 2-year lease with a Nissan Leaf. Oof, I'm going to mix that up a bit. Today, I am going to be joined by Jordan from Out of Spec and Cameron, Jordan's friend, and also fellow Out of Spec viewer, who was really considering this Nissan Leaf lease deal option as an alternative to their current internal combustion engine Subaru Outback. He is going to lay out the numbers, all of his comparison for his specific situation, but it could also give someone inspiration to lay this out for themselves and consider all these different factors and variables that relate to your specific situation. But while these EV leases are awesome, we love to take advantage of them. We love that EVs are having these crazy lease deals, so you can have them sometimes. Unfortunately, it's still not enough to convince someone to trade in their ICE car for an EV. Let's get into the details right now. This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes. Okay, y'all, even if an electric vehicle lease is super, super cheap, it's still not free, and it might be a good bit more expensive than what you already have. So today we have Jordan and Cameron on the podcast. Jordan, he's been here, you know him. But Cameron, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here for the first time.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So you were our expert here. When you looked into this lease, for the Nissan lease that we've been seeing all around just really Colorado. I think Colorado is a great state to have really expensive leases too, because there's so many incentives within the state. But as everyone always comments on the Out of Spec podcast or anything, when there's a cheap lease, there's always fine print. And what is that fine print? So what made you look into this crazy $19 a month, $9 a month Nissan Leaf option in Colorado?
Yeah, so as a bit of background, so my wife has a fairly long commute, about 34 miles a day. And so even before this lease deal came about, I was kind of just thinking about, either a plug-in hybrid or full EV or even just a standard hybrid, just to save on fuel. And just kind of how appealing that is. I've rented a RAV4 Prime, great car. Rented a few other EVs like an older e-tron and stuff like that. So I'm sold on the benefits of an EV as far as quiet and comfort and generally low maintenance cost. So it's just okay, this is a crazy good deal, at least on the headline. Let's really see how much this costs. That's just kind of where the rabbit hole led to.
Yeah, because there's a lot to consider on top of what you pay at the dealership, but also when they advertise it, they don't tell you all the numbers. As we learned with the VinFast, that was advertised as $0 down, $250 a month. Well, there's a lot more things that you have to pay for with the lease. So it's good to lay it out, and not everyone has the determination to lay it out quite like you did. And we'll get into what kind of you came across in your analysis as well. But Jordan, I also want to hear from you what you thought about this Nissan Leaf lease when it came up.
Yeah, I mean, like Cameron said, it's been a hot topic of conversation. I mean, Colorado, like you said, Francie, huge incentives. I mean, parallel and sometimes even more than California. It's wild. So we're not new to crazy lease deals. Colton over at Out of Spec Detailing just got an EV6 for $170 something a month. I've seen recently an Ioniq 5 has been listed for $159 a month. great deals. But there is some varying, like what's down and what's the cost of like title, taxes, registration, all those things. And they're varying amounts. But notably, I mean, Kyle and also our friends over at TFL have done videos on their, buying these Leafs, or I guess leasing these Leafs. And hey, a lot of people have found the deal as well through these videos typically. And they're saying, you know what, this is fantastic. It's perfect for us. And I've had a lot of people ask me about it. I mean, it's like once Kyle and TFL did their videos, everyone's messaging me saying, "Should I get this Leaf?" And I like playing not devil's advocate. I like either way. For some people, I really do think it's a great move. And some people were shopping for a car with like $200-$300 a month budget, and suddenly this pops up, and they're like, you know what? Maybe it can't road trip as well, but for a daily commuter, it's really a good deal. But Cameron is in a unique situation, and even myself in some ways, of like, we have cars that are paid off. And so what's the breakdown of like, should I add an EV to my life? And does it make sense compared to like paying for the gas of an existing gas car? That's a very interesting conversation. Not everyone really breaks down the numbers on that because typically EV cost is so big up front. So of course it can't compete with just a quote unquote free gas car you already have. But there's also, when this comes into play, a super cheap EV. Still, where's the break even point? And I think that's why these numbers are really interesting. And that's why I think it's important to cover both sides of the story. For some people, for a lot of people, this is a fantastic deal, the right car for them. For other people, maybe it's not the best.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm pulling up Kyle's tweets because Kyle has himself attained this and helped his friends attain this lease deal. And they even, if you look here on the piece of paper, they printed out the out of spec reviews logo and Kyle approved on it. So they were very excited. At this point in time, as of July 22nd, Kyle did tweet earlier that apparently they might be out of these Leafs right now because of people really taking advantage of this opportunity, but that they're looking to get them back in stock, which is crazy. One, I don't even know how they could afford this, and I would love to have y'all's input there. But also, Jordan, you make a great point that, of course, we think EVs are awesome. And if you can welcome one into your lifestyle, great. But taking on a new payment or a different payment is something that folks can think about. If you're lucky enough to just be like, I want to go electric and I'm ready to do it, Godspeed, go ahead. Get as many Nissan Leafs as you want. So Cameron.
Yeah, someone bought 10. Yeah. I just wanted to mention that. It's ridiculous. I think it was for like family and friends. There's like, you know what? Leafs for everyone. It's just Leafs everywhere. But yeah, I do think, sorry to interrupt, Francie, but I do think we should maybe start with Cameron looking at the numbers and then talk about the car itself, because there's multiple levels of why this is good or bad. And we're not here to present bias towards the data. It's just the data, and it's how it is for Cameron and myself. So maybe Cameron made his decision mostly in the numbers, but we're also going to look at the compromises of the car afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. So Cameron, can I bring up your sheet now of all your numbers?
Absolutely. Yeah. You bet.
Okay, great. So I love to see this. I'm not like, I could do this if I put my mind to it, but I really love the friends that are this dedicated to go through and make such a detailed spreadsheet. So if you're tuning in on the audio version of the podcast, great. I hope you're having a great day. Also, pop on over to YouTube. Check this out. Pretty impressive. Okay, what are we looking at? Where did you start?
Yeah, so this was less of a scenario for everyone and more of a tailored scenario for me and my wife. So as a bit of background, I drive a 2004 Mazda Miata. So it's 20 years old. It's most definitely paid for, but that's my car. That's my commuter. We're a two-car family. So my wife's car is a 2017 Subaru Outback. And that pretty much does everything else. So that's the vehicle and the stats that they use for that, or for this comparison. Her commute is fairly long, about 34 miles a day, 4 days a week though, which comes out to 544 miles a month. And so I think part of the big headline is, how much it costs per month. So I do have the breakdown of per month, but also for the term of the lease, which is 24 months in this case. So just as a bit of background for people who don't know about the Lease, it's for a base model Nissan Leaf with the small battery, Nissan Leaf S, as they say for the trim level. So EPA estimates range at 150 miles. Most people say you're not getting that, as we've seen with a lot of EVs. They don't usually hit their target. So I put about 120 miles of usable range as an estimate there. For battery size, like I said, 40 kilowatt hours, 37 is usable. That works out to an efficiency of 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour, which is relatively efficient as far as a lot of EVs go, especially those with like all-wheel drive. It's usually a little bit less than that. So based off of pulling 190 kilowatt hours per month from the wall, charging at home, exclusively charging at home, and I don't even have a level 2 in the garage. It'll just be a level 1, which would work fine for this commuting scenario. No problem with that 12% ish charging losses. That's what a lot of people have measured, like more nerds than I am, that actually own a Leaf. So they've measured kind of that, what's going in from the wall and what's actually being put into the battery. My electricity rate is 10.57 cents a kilowatt hour, no matter what time of day. And so that roughly works out to $20 a month for charging to do that 544 miles of commuting. Yeah, not so bad. $20 a month. Hey, that's not bad at all for fuel. For your charging, to get back and forth to work. So this per month payment, the headline is $20, right? That's pretty amazing, or even $9 from certain other dealers. But I took the one from Fort Collins Kia, the Kyle approved, lease deal, and kind of ran with that. So including the $500 down and just kind of breaking that apart into 24 months, your total is going to be $41 a month or $980 over 2 years, which still sounds pretty dang good. However, I actually contacted my insurance agent today and said, hey, if I'm looking to buy this car, here's the VIN number. I want the same coverage I have on the Subaru, which is just comprehensive, $250 deductible kind of plan. What will it cost on this car? They gave me a quote back of $465 per 6 months, which is kind of how we pay. So we're already getting a pretty decent insurance rate because we pay 6 months at a time. We're both, don't have any, tickets or accidents on our driving record. Of course, that'll vary wildly depending on the person and the policy, but that works out to $77 a month. It's like, well, wait a minute, we're over $100 now for this $20 a month lease, right? Here's the thing: what really gets you is Colorado and their registration fees. So they have a registration fee estimator on their website for the first year that it's registered. So I punched everything in. It's based off of the MSRP, and I believe even the vehicle weight to some degree. That comes out to that $605 just for registration for 1 year, which hurts, no matter which way you slice it. And that's not exclusive to EVs. That's just how it is here in the state. I remember when my parents bought a new car back in, I think it was 2012 or 2013. It was a Volkswagen Touareg. And it was over $1,000 for plates the first year. And it was like, ouch, that kind of hurts. Luckily, it goes down after that. And so the second year, if those who are tuning in on YouTube can see it, the second year is 1.5% of the taxable value. And the taxable value is 85% of the MSRP, which is, it also kind of works out weirdly if you think about it. It's like, even if somebody gave you the car, the state of Colorado doesn't care. They just care what the MSRP is. Basically, it doesn't matter what you paid for it. It matters what it's worth. And that's what they tax you on or charge you on for your plates. So taking all that into consideration, that works out for the second year of this lease to $452. So a total of over $1,000, $1,057 for registration for 2 years with this vehicle. I put $0 for maintenance. I certainly hope that's the case for a new car. There's not going to be any oil changes. You might just have to do tire rotations, but oftentimes that's covered, and hopefully any other issues will be covered under the warranty. So that totals with insurance, charging, registration, no maintenance, and the lease to $182 a month for the Leaf. Still not bad, relatively. You know, a lot of cars out there that are $400, $500, $600 a month for just an average kind of car. Still a pretty good deal. However, comparing it to our 2017 Outback, which is paid off, we're getting 27 mpg, which is a little less than normal. We have some larger all-terrain tires on here, so that definitely has made an effect as far as less mpg. But check out the range. Like, we regularly get 450 miles on a tank. Like, that's pretty impressive. Usually we'll fill it once a week, and that's about a half a tank that we, worth of fuel that we put in there. So taking that into account, that comes out to about 20.2 gallons per month of fuel going into that car just for commuting. The cost, I look at the average cost of gas. Of course, it varies wildly depending on, of course, what state you're in, but even your county. I'm located in Adams County. Our average price is $3.18 a gallon for regular, and that the Outback takes regular, doesn't take premium. However, we're Costco members. We're like super avid Costco members, so we go to Costco every time to fill up. It's usually kind of our weekly trip. Fill up the car, get some groceries, and on with the day. Costco, at least today, was $2.76 a gallon for regular, which is pretty good. And I've even seen a little bit lower here recently. But that's the other thing with gas, is that it varies in price day to day, even hour to hour. Whereas electricity is a little more of a stable, charge. So we're just going to go with the Costco price of gas because that's what we do. That's what applies to our family. So the lease payment, $0. It's paid off. This car is worth currently about 10 grand, and that's with about $1,000 worth of hail damage that we acquired about a month ago. So,
oh no,
yeah, that was kind of sad, but it can be fixed. It's not a big deal. Certainly not as bad as a lot of other people around us. So we're pretty thankful for that. Insurance is not that much less than the Leaf. So about $415 for every 6 months versus $465, which the Leaf was. And then fuel, this is where I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to save a ton of money on fuel versus charging at home. It's going to be cheap. That is the case. However, we're spending about $55 a month on gas just for that commute run at Costco. Now, it could be more if we're using the Colorado average or even the county average. But like I said, I put this together for us and how we use this vehicle. Registration is much, much cheaper, about $139 a year versus the Leaf, which was $600 to $400 and something. Yeah, maintenance I put in there. Luckily, this car has been really reliable for us. We have had a couple repairs over the past couple years of ownership, but nothing major. So I just put 2 oil changes in there, and I do those myself because it's super easy on that car. So at $35 an oil change, $70 in maintenance. It already has new brakes, tires are in good shape, that sort of thing, just sort of consumables. So maintenance costs really isn't a huge concern, at least as of yet, with this car's age or mileage. It all totals out to about $139 a month to run and operate the Subaru. Even with its kind of reduced gas mileage over its counterparts and with that higher fuel cost, certainly. Even more for fun, I did a cost per mile. Because, so if you have a car for business, you usually get reimbursed a certain amount per mile or whatever. The Leaf costs 33 cents a mile, where the Subaru costs 25 cents a mile. Per month, you're saving $43, which doesn't sound like a lot, but hey, that's $43. Over the course of 2 years, that's over $1,000. But here's the kicker that we'll talk about here in a second, is that we own that asset. It's still worth 10 grand to this day. Whereas the Leaf, I'm paying that $4,300 over the course of the 2 years, but I don't own it. There was no information on Fort Collins Nissan's website about the Lease, if there is a residual value, like buyout price that you could buy it at or anything like that. But I'd even seen, kind of doing a little bit of this research, there was some people that said that Nissan wouldn't let them buy out their lease, which is interesting. So I don't know if that's 100% true for this particular lease deal. However, it's something to consider, especially if you love the car. If you love the car, you're like, man, this has been really, really great, reliable, good transportation, pretty cheap to run. I want to buy this thing. If you can't, well, that's a bummer. But if you can, great. I just want to know how much that's going to cost. So that's another consideration to take into account, is that you don't own a lease, but if you've paid off your car, you own it. Or at the very least, even if you haven't fully paid it off, you're making payments towards that end goal. So you have equity in that vehicle, though it is depreciating, but every car depreciates. Which brings me on to the next point of depreciation. We've seen all the headlines about EVs depreciating like tanks in the first couple of years that they've been produced, and the Leaf is no exception. It's gone down by 45% in 1 year on average. The Outback depreciated 67% in 7 years. That's it's a little bit different, and obviously the curve will look a little different for the Leaf. I'm sure it'll bottom out or kind of level out a little sooner. That's still a consideration. Buying a used one, I found this one here locally in Colorado. It's a 2022, so it's 2 years old. It's got 10,000 miles on it. One owner. This accident / minor damage was a couple hail dents on the roof. That's all that it was reported. Don't let that scare you away. But it's listed for $14,991. This car also qualifies for that $4,000 used EV tax credit from the IRS. And so that brings it to just under 11 grand for a car that's 2 years old with 10,000 miles on it. That seems like a pretty dang good deal to me. And in our case, that could be even more appealing because guess what the Subaru's worth? About 10 grand. So we could trade the thing straight across, get a newer car with less miles, come out pretty okay financially, which is usually not something you hear about cars. so yeah, that was kind of the breakdown. There's a little bit more information here, but I just picked one off of Fort Collins Nissan's website that was qualifying for this crazy lease deal, and just looked at that there. That's about how the math works out, is that surprisingly, with a 7-year-old car, it's still cheaper just to keep that thing going. That doesn't get, it gets decent gas mileage. It's not like a pickup truck that gets, 19, 18 miles per gallon, but it's also not a Corolla that gets 40. So it's a fairly average, I would say, kind of vehicle that we see kicking around here in Colorado.
Cameron, thank you. That was so good. That was really honestly entertaining. I feel like I've been taught so often in the podcast, and I was just like following along like it was in class. Jordan, what do you think?
No, I think it's great. I think it's for our data forward nerd level listeners, we love this. Cameron, it's funny. I'm just picturing you telling all this to Megan, and she's like asleep by the third line. just like, all right, trust me.
Too long didn't read.
It's cool to have the actual summary, and I guess a couple initial thoughts just triggered from the conversation. So it's interesting because even with home charging, it came out to be more to get the Leaf in your case, which is, I think, an interesting point. A lot of people make the case of public DC fast charging is expensive. It is. It's not. That's not much better than gas. Really depends on the car, though. You have some Rivians with 2 miles per kilowatt hour, and then you have the new Model 3 with 5 miles per kilowatt hour. Like, that's a huge variation in efficiency. But home charging, and I'm jealous of your electricity rates over in Adams County. That's pretty great. But that's interesting. But it's because, like you said, of the unique registration fees. People are like, what in the world? Why is the state charging me so much to drive an EV? Shouldn't they want me to drive an EV? And here's the thing. A lot of infrastructure taxes come from fuel taxes, like gas station taxes. And if you're buying an EV and charging at home, the state doesn't see any of the fuel taxes that they would have recouped from you. So this is a different way for people to pay that tax to the state or government, whatever governing party. So that's an explanation of that in case anyone was curious. But then, gas prices do vary, like you said. And maintenance can be a bit of a toss-up. So it's funny, Cameron. This is like almost like a gamble, and I like your math is all valid, but it's like technically we could be doing a sad but funny podcast in like 8 months, and you'll be like, "So the engine blew on the Outback." But right. I don't see that, and you are mechanically inclined, so that's why doing a DIY oil change helps. You already don't have to worry about brakes, but to play as devil's advocate, someone in this similar situation where they really are breaking down all the numbers, they might not be comfortable doing their own maintenance. And then the added expense of typical oil changes, tire rotations that you pay for, even brakes, maybe someone else has a similar car, even an Outback, that's coming up on a major service interval, which could be thousands of dollars. At that point, maybe this is a good deal. Like, it really is so case dependent. And that's why I'm glad we're covering this, because this sometimes, especially in recent headlines, has been preached as this is the best deal. How could you not do it? And I think this is good to mention, like, in some cases, it's not. I would be curious, Cameron, maybe we can play with the numbers later when we're feeling nerdy over a beer or something. Is there a one of those weird multi-line graphs where if Megan, your wife, had a longer commute, is there some difference in break-even point where suddenly, because the gas delta between the cost of electricity and cost of gas is a big difference. But then on the flip side of that led me to another thought. My thoughts are all over the place. I wanted to bring this point to light that Cameron could survive with level 1 charging, because this is not a big battery. And like Cameron said, it's decently efficient. It's not the most efficient car out there, but 40 kilowatt hours it's not like level 1 charging a Rivian, to bring that up again. I lived with the Fiat 500e for about a week, and I was able to level 1 charge that because I didn't have huge commutes. It has a 150 mile range, just like the Leaf, or just under that. And so, if I was doing 50 miles, 60 miles a day, I could have level 1 charged it overnight and recouped just that energy, even though it's quote unquote slow charging, which it is. It still would do just about enough to get me on the commute. So I think that was worth mentioning, but I don't know, any more thoughts, Francie, or responses, Cameron?
Well, yeah, this is interesting because I have a 2016 Subaru Outback that is paid off. And I think people are generally like, and it's also, I would love to go all electric, have just, everything electric, but I do have this paid off car that I own. And I think generally I have heard from people like, well, even I think it's more wasteful to get rid of a car that runs just to go electric. And because a lot of people are eco motivated, and sometimes that factors into it. They're like, I already have something that works. Why would I get rid of it? Where's that going to go? What is my impact there? But I'm not really sure about that. I don't really know how that all plays out. I'm sure it's specific to the situation, but I think that factors in too. And then, of course, to break it down, money wise, Jordan did say, like, you have to look at the headlines, because just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's free, even though it might sound like it's almost free. You want to compare it. So I do think this is funnily relevant to my personal situation in a way, because I have a Subaru Outback, but now of course I have the VinFast VF8 to drive around, and now the Tesla Model 3, while Jordan has the VinFast VF8 to drive around. But I really enjoyed all of your numbers, and I was curious, you kind of mentioned it about the residual value and the buyout at the end, but was there any other missing information that you would want to look into, or you couldn't find, or that you're curious about?
I don't think so. That was kind of the big question mark for at least the Lease. I know people say, 3.2 kilowatt hours or 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour rather. That's super low. I get 5.5 on mine regularly, and I'm just like, well, you got to think about who's driving it. It's just my wife. She's not like a crazy nerd who is like, okay, well, it's this amount of temperature outside. I'm going to set the climate to this. I'm going to use eco mode and one pedal driving. She's going to get in it and drive it to work and back. And so, and use the AC when it's hot, use the heat when it's cold. And so that's kind of where some of those maybe a little bit lower than maybe some people would argue about as far as efficiency or range numbers. But yeah, I guess to kind of go back to Jordan's point about, where the state or even the country comes up with their money to keep roads repaired, whether we decide that they're doing a good job or not, they get their money from a gas tax. And so, yeah, like you said, some of the registration fees are a little higher. I saw this blurb on the state's website saying that vehicle or EV owners, plug-in hybrid or battery electric, must pay an annual fee of $57 plus inflation. There's an extra little article that they reference in there, starting 2022-2023 fiscal year. And as I was playing with the fee estimator, I just put in basically the info about like a brand new Subaru Outback. Like, okay, change the fuel type to gasoline, same year, look up that curb weight, and I just left the price the same just to kind of, reduce the amount of variables going on. And the price really wasn't a lot different as far as the total fees do. So I'm not so sure that this estimator takes into account that $57 plus inflation every year for basically that EV quote gas tax that they're charging. So there's that to take into account. And yeah, like Jordan said, the if the Subaru dies tomorrow, and it's like, well, it's obviously not worth 10 grand anymore, but it's still worth something. So it can be sold for parts or depending on how expensive the repair is. And to Francie's point, as far as eco-friendliness and for the environment, it's oftentimes more friendly to repair something that you already have than to buy a whole brand new one, just to increase that lifespan from that vehicle. So yeah, there's still definitely some questions that could be applied to other people as far as, yeah, like Jordan said, if there's a longer commute, or if you have a free charging station at work or at your school or whatever, because this is taken into account that we don't. Neither of our employers offer that. Well, actually, I take that back. I think my wife's does, but I think it's only for like a couple hours, which would more than cover it. But to hassle around with her job of going back all the way out to this parking garage and then switching her car around, that's not entirely practical. So I tried to paint the picture, the worst case scenario for both vehicles of like, hey, this is the kind of gas mileage we're getting, and this is how much it costs to charge the Leaf at home 100% of the time, that sort of thing. So yeah, those numbers can be played with. However, when I did, because I was like, okay, let's use the Colorado average fuel price of $331 instead of $276. Like, that's a pretty big difference in price. The delta still doesn't close in the Leaf's favor. There's still a little bit cheaper to run that Outback, even at that higher fuel cost. So yeah, it's like I said, it's those registration fees that get you, and insurance is a little bit more expensive, like we said. But if you don't qualify for this tax credit, how does that work with a lease? That's a question I have. I'm like, I thought that kind of money went to the dealer instead of into your like tax pocket, if that makes sense. But I don't know if you still have to qualify for that. Do you guys have any further info on how that works or no?
Yeah, I think the consumer still has to qualify for the tax credit, but it does come off of the top of the MSRP now, so it's not. Yeah, you don't get it later. You get the benefit of it right now, but yeah, it's filtered through the dealer, which is, yeah, it's a change definitely from last year. I think it might be a little bit simpler because you're not waiting for like a tax rebate from the government, and it might not come. And we've heard some stories about that, some issues there. But I mean, when it breaks it down, this kind of delta may or may not make a difference. Maybe you just did it because it interests you, but you still want to leave. But it does make me think, okay, sure, you could trade in for an old one, but when Jay, whatever your name is, Jordan, when did Leafs, because they're CHAdeMO, so we also want to talk about that. Like the charging technology is CHAdeMO. It's very old. It's not very fast. It's the the original one that took over. But
so the big deal here is, and this leads us into the next part that I mentioned that we should talk about, is some of the shortcomings. So Cameron and I would be funny combo in like a movie, like the cast of like where two characters are very different. Cameron's showing all the data on why not to do it, and I'm just emotionally saying, no, I refuse to drive a Leaf. I'm just like, I don't like it. Actually, it is a great car. It's effectively a Nissan Sentra with more space and less oil changes and fuel. But it is still, the underpinnings are roughly over a decade old. The technology is not remotely up to date with quote unquote modern EV standards. It's using CHAdeMO, which is, an outdated technology. Technically, I mean, still fairly relevant in Japan. It was a Japanese charging standard. We've since switched to CCS, but the Leaf did not switch. It's not a big deal. For most people, you'll be driving and charging at home. And that's why I do say, like, this is still a great deal. If someone is still lucky enough to get one of these at this price, I don't know if there's still many left, like maybe it was like a fire sale situation. But a lot of friends have asked if they should get this. And I've told a lot of friends, yes, based on their circumstances. If you have home charging or work charging, awesome. If you were hoping to get this because it's super cheap, but then rely on public charging, well, as we discussed earlier, the cost of public charging can be a lot. And also the hassle of there's fewer CHAdeMO things than there were before. They're starting to be replaced by CCS. But notably, Kyle mentioned in his video, and there's a CHAdeMO to CCS adapter. There's a few of them. So you're not up a creek without a paddle, but it's a fairly expensive paddle. This adapter is hundreds of dollars. I can't remember how expensive, but it's fairly expensive because it's trying to do it safely, converting DC energy safely and translating all the metrics. That's a challenge. It does also have a J7072 port. So like I said, home charging or even charging at work. If you have level 2 charging on either end, or like we discussed, even some level 1 charging could be okay. There's actually a parking garage at the Anschutz Medical Campus that has like a whole floor, which is hundreds of spaces with dedicated like house outlets. So when I actually worked on the Anschutz Medical Campus for a bit, I was testing a Zero motorcycle for a couple months, and I was able to commute there and charge level 1 charge at work, which was really funny. It was like bring your own cable. So there was Teslas everywhere, like level 1 charging. It was hilarious because a lot of people had short commutes, and so 8 hours of level 1 charging, that's like 8 kilowatt hours. Boom, that could be your entire commute depending on where you're coming from. So that's one piece of the technology. The other piece, as Cameron mentioned to me, was the lack of active thermal management on this battery. So it's not a car that's very capable with road trips. Charging speed's not great regardless, but even then, consecutive DC fast charging sessions could cause to overheating of the battery, which would just throttle its capabilities. There's no heat pump. It's not ideal in the winter. It would still work. Like if you're working through winter and summer conditions, this car will operate, but it's just not amazing. So given its limitations, there still are, like I said, people who this is a good car for. But for me, the Leaf doesn't interest me personally. It's old, outdated technology. All the switch gear, everything feels like 2009. And this is the base model, no nicer sound system. The premium sound system, total side note, on the premium sound system of the nicer Leaf, the SV, I think, very interesting sound system. There's a whole history on how Bose and Nissan developed that to use half the watts of the normal typical Bose system of the time. So it's very efficient sound system, super cool, nerdy stuff. And that's a bit more powerful, bit more bigger battery, more range, heated seats, heated steering wheel, like just a couple things that are nice in the premium Leaf. But it's not for me because I am, someone who loves nicer technology and I want to like the car I drive. I am a car guy at heart, but a lot of people are not car people. In fact, they don't want to think about cars. And this is a fantastic tool for some people, just not Cameron.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Francie.
No, you go ahead, Cameron.
All right. Well, to Jordan's point is that we had talked about this a little bit earlier today, and the more I looked at it and thought about it, I'm like, this is a great just beater commuter car. If you wanted to buy a new beater commuter car, because it doesn't do anything particularly great, but it gets you back and forth to work and does it pretty well from what I understand. I've ridden in one of them that Jordan had at one point for review, and it's like, this thing is quiet, it's comfortable, and it's got plenty of power to roast the tires if you want to have a little fun, and so I equated it to a 2009 Toyota Corolla. It's just totally unobtrusive, flies under the radar, but it's all reliable, and you don't really care if somebody runs into it with a shopping cart or something like that. It just does its job. But unfortunately for us as a 2-car family, the Outback is the Swiss Army knife. Like, it's the road tripper because it's pretty comfortable and it's spacious, and we do a little off-roading with it. We go camping and stuff too sometimes. And I don't think the Leaf could do really any of that very, very well. And so we'd be, eliminating kind of, like you said, sort of road trips. My wife's family is from Wisconsin, and so we went to visit them over the 4th of July on 2 tanks of gas. And that was it in the Subaru. It's so about 1,000 miles to get there. But the Leaf, we'd still be making our way if we had that car trying to go that vast distance. But if you're sticking around town, what a good deal. But I think the better deal is a used one if you're looking for that kind of a car.
I mean, if you want a thrilling drive, as they say so on their website, with the 2 battery options, which is a fun way. Like, it definitely has more power than your average ICE, just being electric. But I think you're totally right, Cameron, where it's like, this is the non-offensive, get around town, could fit right into the family's needs. Like, your kids could drive it and you wouldn't really be worried. Kind of like the Prius a little bit. Where it's just like, it's just fine. Although people did hate on the Prius for a while, but people also hate on the Leaf. So, what are you going to say?
To hate on anything. Well, I was going to say I know it's turning into a longer show, but I want to mention, maybe you're listening and you wanted this deal or you wanted a similar deal, and you're just like, dang it, it's still not cheap enough. There are lots of used EVs. Cameron mentioned the tanking of depreciation that's happened, and that sucks genuinely for maybe a buyer who really cares about resale value. Not everyone does, but and if you keep it and hold on to it forever, I mean, that really doesn't affect you at all anyways. But there's so many good deals to be had on used vehicles, and if the Leaf is intriguing to you because it's priced well, you can look at I'd say 2018 was the model year when this quote unquote newer version came out, and that's when they introduced this 40 kilowatt hour battery pack. So look at as old as 2018, and it's going to be basically the exact same car that you would get in this lease deal now. And I guarantee you can find one quite used. And even as far back as 2015, that's when they introduced the original bigger battery in the Leaf, which would do about 100 miles on a charge, maybe with some degradation, just under 100 miles. But for some people's commutes, that's it. I mean, my hometown is about the size of Boulder. I could have survived with a Fiat 500e or an i3. There's lots of good, compelling, quote unquote, earlier EVs, even some that you might say are outdated technology. That doesn't deter me completely. I just don't want to buy or lease a new car and have it for 2 years and have to, I guess, rely on the older technology. But if it's something that's, a more unique commute, smaller commute, there's so many options that I've been intrigued because I like small, quirky, even older cars. I mean, some of the older EVs do intrigue me. Kyle has an old e-Golf. He has an old Leaf. He bought a Leaf for $3,000, and for some people, that even works fine. I drove that around the coast in LA with our friends Patrick and Liv, a Mach-E vlog, and you know what? It barely did the 15-mile drive to the coast and back, but it did it. So, hey, there's I think. Yeah, we're at this point where there is technically an EV for everyone. You just might have to look a little bit harder if you're budget conscious. But I am. Facebook Marketplace is my friend, so I'm happy to help anyone research a little bit if you want to hit us up.
Not even for $9 a month plus tax, Jordan. You don't want the Nissan Leaf that Boulder Nissan is offering.
Now that you throw the American flag and the eagle behind it, now I'm interested.
Yeah, I agree. I think it could fit in, but it's totally up to you. And it's fun to lay out the numbers to really compare because there's lots of fine prints. And something that I want to get into the podcast soon is different states and their different EV tax registration and fees that are outside of registration. And some of them are far more expensive than others, and some of them are really cheap. So interesting way that they go about kind of regathering what I guess they miss out on with the gas tax. But yeah, thanks, Cameron, for the analysis. I appreciate you sharing your work with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's it's interesting to see all that. I was kind of anticipating it to be a little bit more in the favor of the Leaf, just seeing how crazy good this deal is. But yeah, I'm glad we ran the numbers.
But you don't know what you're going to do?
I think we're just going to keep the Subaru. Just keep that thing going.
I feel like some of our listeners might be sad that you're not going electric, but sometimes that's the case. And I think as EV, likers, lovers, advocates, enthusiasts, it's good to understand this point of view and not to ignore it, because it is very realistic as well. And it's always great to meet people where they are and understand that there's lots of different situations. So,
and if you're looking to add a third car, then sure, run that sucker into the ground, commute with it, all over town and stuff, and leave the miles off of your other, weekend vehicle, whether it's a convertible or some big SUV or something like that. But we were looking more just to have one or two vehicles total.
We'll just have to keep an eye on these competitive EV leases for one of them that is just too good to pass up, where the numbers match up. Maybe we'll get you there, and maybe Jordan will find one too. But it doesn't sound like he was really in like with the Nissan Leaf to begin with as an electric option.
Yeah, we would love to get into an EV at some point, and probably will. Once the Outback dies or there's something happens to it or whatever. But unfortunately, today's not the day.
Well, listeners, let us know what you think about this. Have you also done an analysis like this? If you have, amazing. I love that. And keep an eye out for cheap leases, and always make sure to bring that to our attention. And maybe we can dive into the details and do some comparisons like this, because I think they're really helpful. So thank you, Cameron, for coming onto the podcast. And thank you, Jordan, for linking us all up.
Totally welcome. Thanks for having me. Hope to be back again someday.
Yes, me too. Always welcome. Thanks, everyone, for plugging in for another episode of the Out of Spec podcast. If you enjoyed it, let us know. You know how. Drive safe. Stay charged. See you next time. Bye.
Yeah.